Chapter 2, Proletariats and Communists. Page 22. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletariats as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which they shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the working class parties by this only. In the national struggle of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. 2. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are, on the one hand, practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, the section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of communism is the same as that of all the other proletariat parties. For formation of the proletariat into a class, the dictatorship of the proletariat, overthrow of the bourgeoisie supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. So again, a dictatorship of the proletariat would mean that the masses of workers would be dictating the conditions, a rationally centrally planned economy designed to meet the needs of the many, as opposed to the capitalist system that we have now, which is only designed to meet the needs of a very few, the capitalist class at the top. Let's see. Which do you think will happen faster? Is workers uniting or right-wing populist uprisings on their own? Hedges has been warning us that if we can't get it together, revolution will come from the right. Yeah, I mean, really appreciate Hedges, insight and an analysis on a lot of things. But I also think that, I don't know, he also is very, I feel like, pessimistic in some ways, or maybe he's just, I don't know, a realist. But I mean, I want to say I hope it's the workers uniting, because right-wing populists, I mean, that's just basically I don't know, that would be very, very bad, especially for all the people who are against fascism and all the ills that come with that. And we see these various reactionary elements on the right in the United States, whether it be the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, or these other fascistic groups who are out there spreading hate and white supremacy and anti-immigrant rhetoric and etc. So, and then their anger is obviously very much displaced, or I mean placed on in a completely opposite direction of where it actually should be placed. And I think that's just a way of the ruling class to take the class analysis out of it, and you direct it at things that aren't actually the cause of people's problems, which is what Trump did. It's the the immigrants are the problem. It's these people coming in from these quote unquote shithole countries, etc. When it's actually no, it's like the capitalist class is fucking over everybody. It's not the people coming from these really horrible conditions, largely due to U.S. imperialism. It also needs to be pointed out. So I really hope it's the former and not the latter there, Bill. But it's so hopefully that's the case. Hedges watch the system crush his friend Nader. Yeah, I mean Ralph Nader would have been a really amazing president. I think he actually would have really spoke truth to power and tried to enact different policies that would have helped out the working class, because he was really big, like I think getting like seatbelts into cars and different like car safety stuff. He's always been like a consumer advocate. I think he ran as a Green Party candidate, right? And Hedges was his speechwriter during 2000. something like that. And I always like how Hedges talks about how, Bernie Sanders is a sheepdog for the Democratic Party. I don't know, that always brings a smile to my face. Yeah, misplaced anger for sure. Misplaced, misdirected, and that's kind of what the capitalist class, wants. They don't want the working class to, unite, because if we're able to do that on any type of substantive, scale, then we'd really be able to, bring the capitalist class to the bargaining table, if you will. Let's see. The communists, therefore, wait, I already read that part. Page 22. I'm going to probably read, maybe try to get through another 10 pages, but it's definitely it takes a lot longer reading it out loud than it does in my head. So I might have to do a part 2, but I do think, this is really important book. Page 23, the theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on the ideas and principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle. Again, like as Lenin talked about, it's a Marxist-Leninist thought outlook, is a concrete analysis of the concrete conditions, not looking at things in the past and then, applying that outlook to the present, or not looking at how you want things to be in the future. Actually, what is going on right now on the ground, and using that, as your analysis, as kind of your standpoint, right? The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change, consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeoisie property. This distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeoisie property. That's important. But the abolition of bourgeoisie property. But modern bourgeoisie private property is the final, most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of many by the few. And that is, you want to sum up capitalism in a couple of words. It's the exploitation of the many by the few. Well said, Marx and Engels. In this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence of abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. So again, they're not talking about getting rid of all property. They're talking about getting rid of bourgeoisie property that's, was acquired through exploitation, through exploitating practices of capitalism, of the working class. Let's see. Yep. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeoisie form? There is no need to abolish that. Development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and is still destroying it daily. Yes, 100%. I mean, you see all these big, box stores, chain stores, the Amazons, the Walmarts of the world, where these little quote unquote mom and pop shops are, disappearing at a rapid rate. To what extent they even, exist at this point, right? Or do you mean modern bourgeoisie private property? Yes, they obviously do. But does wage labor create any property for the laborers? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e., that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon the conditions of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. Always, they're analyzing the contradictions that are, taking place in capitalist society. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. This is page 24. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e.
I'm sorry if he's boring, y'all. Sometimes he talks a
She's
lot.
the boring one.
Hey, no, I'm not.
Yes, she is.
You are.
I.e. that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely required to keep the labor in a bare existence as labor. Again, that's what all employers, businesses try to do, pay the workers the least amount as possible in order to maximize their profits, right? What therefore the wage labor appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only so far as the interests of the ruling class require it. Law, yes, law bill. In bourgeoisie society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of labor. Doesn't that sound like a much better system? Under a communist society, person's labor is a means to widen, enrich, to promote the existence of the working class, as opposed to under a capitalist system, working class's labor is used to increase the wealth of the capitalist class. Again, that exploitation is inherent to capitalism, right? In bourgeoisie society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeoisie society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality, 100%. In the abolition of the state of things is called by the bourgeoisie abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeoisie individuality, bourgeoisie independence, and the bourgeoisie freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom, page 25, by freedom is meant under the present bourgeoisie conditions of production, free trade, free selling, and free buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with the restricted selling and buying with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communist abolition of buying and selling of the bourgeoisie conditions of production and the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with 100%. For 9/10 of the population, existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. Again, very small capitalist elite bourgeoisie class at the top owns and controls a vast majority of society. All these different resources are in the hands of a very small few, while the masses struggle. The poverty amidst plenty that capitalism generates, right? Generates extreme wealth for a very few, and everybody else is fighting for crumbs, if that, unfortunately. But Richard Wolff said that the system is the sickness. Let's see. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existent property for the immense majority of society. I know it's just so interesting when people try to prop up capitalism and talk about how great it is. Like, bro, people, you're actually not a capitalist. Do you own any capital? It reminds me of that meme. What is that? That Forrest Gump, that Tom Hanks movie. It's like I forgot which. They're on the fishing or shrimping boat. And it's like I think it's Captain Dan. He says, I support capitalism, or I'm a capitalist. And then Forrest Gump's like, you don't have any capital, Dan, or something like that. You've probably seen it around. It's a good one. In a word, from the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent into social power capable of being monopolized, i.e. from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeoisie property, into capital, from that moment you say individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual I mean no other person than the bourgeoisie, than the middle class owners of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to provide, there's a very important distinction, all that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. Again, be getting rid of exploitation in that sense. Kind of important, I think. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. Again, like communism doesn't mean there wouldn't be labor, there wouldn't be work. You just wouldn't be getting exploited through that work, through that labor. According to this, bourgeoisie society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through their sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The capitalist class, right? The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology. There can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. Because that's how capital generates their wealth, is through exploiting working class through their wage labor, surplus, surplus labor value, surplus theory of labor value, right? All objections urged against the communist mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communist modes of producing and appropriate intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeoisie, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself. So the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. The culture, the loss which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. 100%. We're all treated as, working class is treated as, cogs in this capitalist, machine. One of us dies, well, then somebody else, get in there and, become that sprocket on the wheel. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeoisie property the standard of your bourgeoisie notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeoisie production and bourgeoisie property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into law for all. 100%, like the laws we have in the United States are designed and written and executed for the benefit of the, working class, right? A will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economic conditions of the existence of your class. A selfish misconception that induces you to transform into internal laws of nature and of reason, and the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in this case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeoisie form of property. Abolition of the family, even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation this present family, the bourgeoisie family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletariats and in public prostitution. Page 27. The bourgeoisie family will vanish as a matter of course when a complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we plead guilty. Guilty as charged. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replaced home and education by social. And your education. It's not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate by the intervention of society, direct or indirect, by means of school, etc. The communists have not invented the intervention of society and education. They do but seek to alter the character of the intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. Again, ruling class, ideas, ways of looking and viewing at the world, definitely very much, embedded in K through 12 education in the United States, and I would say at the university level as well. And I would, argue that's probably very true for, a lot of other capitalist societies, abroad, right? Let's see. The bourgeoisie claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry, all family ties among the proletariats are torn asunder and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in the chorus. The bourgeoisie sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to know the conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. The Powell memo lays out how the ruling class wanted to influence all society, including education. Powell became a Scottish justice. Yes, that what is that first name? But yeah, I know what you're talking about there, Bill Bradley. That's a really cool. I like your avatar there. Let's see. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. Kind of important, right? That's something we should all want. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeoisie at the community of women, which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women as existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeoisie, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletariats at their disposal, not to speak of the common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, I got 3.5 more pages, then I'll end it. But this is, again, definitely highly recommend reading this on your own time. Happy that you're listening to me ramble on about this great work that's still so relevant, even though this was written like 172 years ago by Marx and Engels. Bourgeoisie marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of community of women, springing from that system, i.e. prostitution, both public and private, or, sex work, to use the, present-day vernacular, right? The communists have further reproached with the desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working man have no country. Again, that's why, from my perspective, it's very problematic for so-called socialist or communists, in the United States to be, claiming that the U.S. flag is some, symbol of freedom or some symbol of good. No, look at the actual fucking material conditions, what that flag means to so many people within the imperial core here in the United States, and particularly people, abroad. I don't know, people in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Iran, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, etc., etc. A lot of people see the American flag, rightly to them, it's a symbol of, genocide, white supremacy, sanctions, wars, occupations, rape, murder, torture, etc., right? Stolen land, right? Genocide. Let's see. We cannot take from them what they have not got, since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation. It is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeoisie sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between people are vanishing gradually from day to day, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the condition of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions of the emancipation of the proletariat, which they're a little bit off base here, because we saw, the Russian Revolution and the establishment of the USSR, Russia, at that time, the material conditions there were very, backwards compared to a lot of other, places, particularly in Europe, and yet they were able to have this successful socialist, revolution. So they were a little bit, off on that, but we'll cut them a little slack because these Engels and Marx made a huge, contribution, right? Let's see. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put into an end, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put to an end. The proportion as the antagonisms between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. And again, currently, living in the United States is the biggest purveyor of death and destruction in the world. Always needs to be, pointed out. It's also a highly developed, capitalist society. And as Lenin talked about, as I mentioned before, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, right? And the U.S. is always trying to overthrow and destabilize any independent, any left-leaning, any socialist country, and that has unfortunately remained unchanged. Not surprisingly to me, unfortunately, under the Biden administration. I just saw a thing that Anthony Blinken said that they're not going to lift any sanctions on Syria. They're still sanctioning the fuck out of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, North Korea, Iran, etc. It's disgusting, right? The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving a serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions in one world, man's consciousness change with every change in the conditions of his material existence and the social relations? And yes, 100%. Like our social conditions, the material world, impact our outlook and how we see things. 100%. I definitely agree with Marx and Engels on that. What else does the history of ideas prove? That intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed. The ruling ideas of each age have been the ideas of the ruling class. Blinken and Austin, are you talking about Lloyd Austin? I'm assuming the Secretary of Defense, right? Create a lobbying firm before taking the position to create a direct line to themselves for the MIC, Pine Island Capital Partners. I don't put it past that type of shit. That revolving door between big business, military industrial complex, and the U.S. government. I think before taking that job as Secretary of Defense, Austin was one of the higher ups at Raytheon. He was like on their board of directors, something, right? Bill Bradley. Let's see, page 29, and we got 2.5 pages left. At least for this chapter. I'm going to call it good after that. What else does the history of ideas prove? I already did that. Yeah. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact with the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and the disillusion in the old ideas keeps even pace with the disillusion in the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religious were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Yeah. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religion, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. Quote, there are besides eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society, but communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them to a new basis. It is therefore acts in contradiction to all past and current experiences. What does this accusation reduce itself? So, the history of all past society is constituted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to past ages, vis-a-vis the exploitation of one part of society by the other. We definitely very much have that in the United States. Again, the capitalist class exploits the working class. No wonder then that the social consciousness of the past ages, despite all multiplicity and variety in its displays, moves with certain common forms or general ideas which cannot be completely vanished except with the total disappearance of class antagonism, which is what communism means, a classless and stateless society, because a classless society, you no longer need the state because the state comes into play because of these class antagonism, right? And so that is what, the lower phase of communism, socialism, would be the dictatorship of the proletariat. The highest phase would be, communism, a classless and stateless society. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. Page 30. Page and a half left. But let us have done with the bourgeoisie objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class, here we go, is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to establish democracy, a dictatorship of the proletariat. So we have, the masses who we would have a rationally and centrally planned economy designed to meet the needs of the masses, as opposed to what we have now in a capitalist system, a system designed to only benefit and enrich, a very small minority of people, right? The capitalist class. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as a ruling class, dictatorship of the proletariat, as I keep mentioning, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeoisie production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient, untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. One more drink. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. 100% what might work, let's say, in the United States might not work as well in Canada, might not work as well in Mexico, might not work as well in Colombia, might not work, et cetera, right? Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with the state capital and exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. I definitely agree with that. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of soil generally in accordance with the common plan. Kind of important to have healthy soil, 100%. Like, not going to be able to feed people if we continue to degrade the soil in the United States, keep spraying and using massive amounts of pesticides and herbicides. Soil health, soil biology, kind of important, right? And yeah. Let's see. 8. Equal obligation of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equal distribution of the population over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of child factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. I would probably, add some, other areas to this, but again, this probably made a lot of sense to Marx and Engels when they were writing this in the, 1840s, 1850s. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power loses its political character. It's, again, that's the withering away of the state, that realization of a true communist society. Political power, properly so called, is merely organized power of one class for oppressing another, 100%. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class, if by means of a revolution it makes itself the ruling class, again a dictatorship of the proletariat, and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonism, yes, and of classes generally, and thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeoisie society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And now I think that is something that we can all hold on to and try to work towards in our own, different ways, in our own different capacities, right? So that was the end of chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto. So we got through the first 2 chapters. There is, I think, 1 or 2 more, but I'm going to end it here. Thanks for hanging out and listening to me read this book and ramble on about how amazing it is. All power to the people. Like the stream if you haven't. Subscribe for more content. Peace, much love. Hope this finds you well. Good night.